Welcome to BIA Media, Canada's top black media provider. Whether you're looking for content on fashion, art, music, or simple lifestyle, we bring you the best the black community in Ottawa has to offer, and so much more. And better yet, do you have a project you need help with? Well, look no further. We provide equipment, studio, and office space, as well as a team of dedicated individuals to help you bring those ideas to life. So don't wait. Check out our new website at biamedia.ca for more information on how to contact us and start creating today. BIA Media, your way.
Good morning, greetings everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome back to our courses, our Sankofa African History courses presented by Jacques Cambrit in partnership with BIA Media. We're here again at 235 Montreal Road, and we are continuing. We're picking up where we left off in December, and for the next 3 weeks, we will be continuing our seminar on Haitian Independence as an all-African revolution. So what we're going to be talking about for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about Haiti in the 20th and in the early 21st century. So we're going to be talking about roughly from 1900 until today. We're going to look at how Haitian independence was threatened during this time period, continually under threat, and how the Haitian people as a African revolutionary force, and I say African because we go back to what we learned in the first 3 weeks. When Haiti achieved independence, January 1st, 1804, 2/3 of the folks that were there that had fought for independence were actually born in Africa. So this is an African revolution. We're going to see the aftermath of that. In addition, we call this a Sankofa seminar because we aren't just studying the Haitian Revolution and Haitian independence because it's the 220th anniversary. We're studying it so that we can learn. We can learn what does it mean to truly be independent? What does it really mean to have a revolution? And how do you maintain a revolution in the face of global enemies and internal enemies? This is a case study. Haiti as a case study should have been studied by African nations getting independence in the 60s and 70s. It should be studied now as African people struggle against neocolonialism, both in the Caribbean, on the continent, and in places where they have migrated. So we have to study Haiti. We have to study the Haitian people and how they react to these things. We need to study how the enemy reacted to the Haitian people. Because as we'll see today, a lot of what happened in the early 20th century is continued throughout the 20th century and continues today, particularly in how the US and other powers treat Haiti and how the Haitian people respond to that and resist against that. So we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that today. So our outline for the next 3 weeks. Today, we're going to be talking about resistance to occupation. We're going to go from roughly 1900 to 1946. And we're going to talk about how the Haitian people successfully resisted US occupation and how Haiti virtually achieved a second independence. Not 1934 when the occupation ended, but really 1946. And we'll talk about all the things that led up to Haiti's second major revolution in 1946. Next week, we're going to talk about resistance to neocolonialism. We're going to talk about the Duvalier years up to the earthquake in 2010 and how international powers continue to prey on Haiti and how internal enemies that masqueraded as leaders of Haitian people collaborated with those external forces. And again, we will always center the focus on how the Haitian people, the Haitian working masses, resisted these forces. And then finally, in week 3, we'll talk about the revolution continues, because the Haitian Revolution is an ongoing process. It didn't end in 1804, it didn't end in 1946, it didn't end when the Duvaliers were deposed. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process to complete what was started in 1804. So we're going to get into that in 2 weeks. So let's situate ourselves geographically and let's do a slight review, not a long review, because you can always go to our course website. You can watch the previous recorded lectures. You can see them on BIA Media's YouTube page. You can see all the lectures we've done, not just for this course and this seminar, but our previous courses as well. You can see all of that. But to briefly recap, in December, we talked about the history of the Haitian Revolution, and we talked about the first century of, well, not really, we talked about the 19th century. We talked about 1804 to roughly the 1880s. And we talked about what happened leading up to the Haitian Revolution. We talked about enslavement in Haiti. We talked about the brutality of the regime of Saint-Domingue, the French-controlled version of the island of Hispaniola, the brutality that existed, how the Africans resisted in the various ways they resisted physically, spiritually, diplomatically. And then we talked about the culmination of the revolution. We talked about the major actors, the Toussaint Louvertures, the Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the Maurice Louvertures, the Henry Christophs, the Rigaud's, and the others. We talked about the conflict that emerged both before the revolution, during the revolution, and at independence between the so-called mulatto class, the class of lighter-skinned, Afro-descendant people that were the children of French slave masters and African women who were set as their own class, both before the revolution and afterwards. And we talked about the conflict between them and the other dark-skinned African folks, the folks that came straight from the continent or folks that were born of enslaved African people in Haiti. So we talked about those conflicts. We talked about how those conflicts led to civil wars, both during the revolution and after. We talked about how the nation was split between North and South for a while, ruled by two different leaders, before it was finally brought back together. But yet those conflicts persisted. That colorism persisted. That conflict also between the elite and the workers existed. How the elite had a particular version of what they wanted Haiti to be, which looked very similar to the French version of what Haiti was going to be, except without the chattel slavery. But they still wanted the exploitation of the Haitian working masses. And we talked about the vision that the Haitian working masses had for Haiti, how they wanted to create a society where they were free to cultivate what they wanted to cultivate, free to use their labor in the way that they saw fit, and the conflict between those two sides. So we saw how that all played out in the 19th century. Various leaders came and went. Some leaders were for the people. Some leaders were for this emerging oligarchy. An oligarchy is a rule of a few, an elite few. Most of that few was led by the remnants of that mulatto class that still valued French culture, still valued French things, still sent their children off to France for school, and even darker-skinned Haitians who were part of this elite as well, who still had that mentality of, although we're free from France, we still want to have the trappings of French culture and French philosophy and French ideas, and how this imbued itself in the legal code of Haiti, in the economic policies of a lot of the Haitian leaders. We talked about the devastating events of the 19th century. 1825, the French threatened to come back and they forced an indemnity on Haiti, where Haiti is forced to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to the French as a penalty for winning their independence. And we talk about how that crippled the Haitian economy going back to 1825 and continuing even up until this day. We talked about the devastating earthquake of 1842, which also played its role in retarding the Haitian economy and Haitian development. And we finished off talking about the resilience of the Haitian people, how throughout all of this, they continued to develop. They continued to build their nation. And more importantly, they continued to be a symbol for African people around the world who were watching Haiti, particularly those that were still in bondage in the Americas, in North America, in the Caribbean, in South America, who were looking to Haiti as their example, looking to the leaders of Haiti as heroes, to be studied, to be honored, to be spoken about. The Toussaint Louvertures, the Christophs, the Dessalines, all these folks. So this is where we'll pick up today. What was going on at the end of the 19th century in the African world in general, but in Haiti in particular? Because by the time we get to 1885, we'll go back to that, the Berlin Conference is happening, is concluding in Europe, where the European powers have gotten together to draw up the terms of how they're going to divide what they call this magnificent African cake. This is where the colonization of Africa, where 90% of African people live, the rest are in the diaspora, 90% of African people are about to experience colonization. From north to Algeria to south to South Africa, Portugal, Italy, Germany, Belgium, they're all figuring out how they're going to divide this magnificent African cake. So by the time we get to the 1880s, 1890s, going into the 20th century, there's really only two remaining African independent nations. One on the continent itself, Ethiopia, which is a symbol, which we've talked about in previous courses, and the other is Haiti. And the Haitian intellectuals at this time understand that symbolism. So as they're fighting to develop their nation, and they're also dealing with this emerging threat of the United States, which is trying to make itself the power in the Western Hemisphere, the Haitian elite, the intellectual elite, are positioning themselves as world authorities on African independence and African revolution. So while the European powers are meeting in Berlin in 1884, 1885, drawing up these plans for colonization based on the belief that Africans cannot govern themselves, Africans can't govern their resources, and Africans need to be civilized, Haitian intellectuals like Joseph Antenor Furman are in Europe, in Haiti, writing, arguing completely against this point. They're arguing that there is no distinction between the races, no matter what the social Darwinists and eugenicists in Europe want to say with their scientific racism. That say that there are classes of human beings, and whites, of course, are on the top, and Africans are at the bottom, blacks are at the bottom. Furman is in France arguing, he writes a book, The Equality of the Human Races. At the same time the Berlin Conference is happening, saying, look at us, look at Haiti, what we were able to do, the only country to move from slavery to independence, to have a successful revolution to overthrow slavery. We have conducted ourselves well as statesmen, as artisans, as writers, in the literary world, in the visual arts world. We've sent our children to the best schools, to the Sorbonne and all these places. You can't talk to us about inequality. You can't talk to us about Africans not being able to run their own affairs. So your whole basis for colonization, your whole basis for Jim Crow segregation that was occurring in North America and Canada and the US and other places, your whole basis for your discrimination against African people in South America, this idea that Africans are inferior, is invalid. And this is what the Haitian intellectuals were bringing to the world, people like Antenor Furman. I want to go back. One of the secondary sources that I recommend, that I'm relying on to recount this history, is a new book, relatively new book. It came out this book was published in, let me give you the year, 2013. So it's about just over 10 years old. Haitian History, New Perspectives. This book is a must-have. It's a collection of articles and essays by various scholars looking at different points in Haitian history. So a lot of what I'll talk about today comes out of this book, and I'll mention a couple of other sources as we go on. In addition, I have posted a number of sources on our course website that you can read, that you can get into to look at the things that we talk about in more depth. So always utilize the course website. As I mentioned, by the time we get to 1896 going into 1900, there are only two independent African nations in the world, Ethiopia and Haiti. I do not count Liberia. I've never counted Liberia. Liberia was a settler colony of the United States, so it's just Ethiopia and Haiti. So for African people around the world, these are their real life Wakandas. These are the two nations that symbolize African freedom, Haiti and Ethiopia. And those two countries had a connection because, again, Haiti is the symbol. It is the source of independence. So you have people like Benito Sylvain, who, after hearing about Ethiopia's defeat of the Italians in 1896, travels to Ethiopia, becomes an aide-de-camp to the Emperor of Ethiopia. So you have a Haitian diplomat who's working in Ethiopia, and he's also seeing what's going on in the rest of the African world. And as he's making his travels in between Africa, Haiti, and Europe, he meets a Trinidadian named Henry Sylvester Williams, who had studied in Nova Scotia. He went to law school in Nova Scotia and also in London. And Henry Sylvester Williams had also traveled, and he had seen the plight of Africans around the world. And they read the reports of what was going on in the newly colonized territories in Africa and what was happening in the Belgian Congo and other places. So this Haitian got together with this Trinidadian, and they decided we should have a conference to bring all African people together to talk about our issues. For the first time in history, Africans from the continent, Africans living in Europe, Africans living in the Caribbean, Africans living in North America would come together in London and talk about their issues and figure out ways that they could collaboratively fight against the common enemies that were slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and colonialism. So this conference, he writes the report for this conference, the first Pan-African conference. This is where we get this term Pan-Africanism. It has its beginnings here. I love his introduction to his report on the conference. Benito Sylvan says, this conference was astonishing for many, disturbing for some, and overwhelmingly important, and of overwhelmingly importance for us being African people. And this is always still the case. When African people decide they're going to do something for themselves, it is astonishing that we can come together. And it's disturbing for the enemies of African progress and African development. But this is one of the most important meetings in the history of African people in the world, where we all got together and said we have to do something about this. And it was the Haitian Benito Sylvan who said, you need to open this up to everybody. Because Henry Sylvester Williams was really just going to have the conference for Africans in the British Empire. But the Haitian, with the wider view of the African world, said, no, we need to open this up for everybody. He also wrote a book on colonialism. As he traveled and he looked and he read about colonization, he wrote a book. He wrote a periodical that published in French the goings-on of these new Pan-African revolutionaries. He was in correspondence with folks like W.E.B. Du Bois, the great African-American scholar. So he is internationalizing this idea of Haitian independence, African independence, and Pan-Africanism. One of the early heroes of bringing African people together is this Haitian brother, Benito Sylvan. He wrote the book on the fate of the natives and colonies of exploitation in 1901. And I think I've put a copy of this text in one of our other classes, I think in the early history of the African Renaissance course, but I also will migrate that to the website for this course. And he talked about conscious enslavers. He talked about unconscious enslavers. So he had different types of categories for the European colonizers in Africa. And he wasn't kind to either one. He said, yeah, there's some Europeans that go into Africa and they're honest. Just say, we're coming to exploit Africans, to take the resources, to do these things. And then he says, you have some Europeans that are coming thinking that Africans are actually savages and uncivilized. So they're not doing it because they really want to hurt Africans. They actually think that they're helping Africans. We said, but you're just as bad as the ones that are actually going in there with the express goal to steal African resources. He said, unconscious enslavers who, without mistreating the indigenous out of prejudice, intend to keep them perpetually in a condition of social inferiority. These are the missionaries that went to Africa. These are the bureaucrats from Europe that came into Africa to establish educational centers as if African people didn't have education before Europeans came. This is who he is talking about. And this speaks to us in 2024 today. Because there are a lot of NGOs, developmental specialists, and other folks that go to Africa, that go to the Caribbean, that go to Haiti with the intention of, they don't use the word civilizing anymore, but they'll say, we want to help develop, or we want to help ensure that Haiti has democracy in the way that we see it, or all these good sounding things, but in effect what they are creating is a situation of dependence. Where Haitian people, where African people aren't relying on themselves, they're relying on them. So we have to be very clear. And he's writing about this in 1901. He's giving us the blueprint in 1901. But by the time we get 15 years later, Haiti internally, like all democracies, is having its issues. It's not uncommon in the early 20th century. Democracy is a relatively new concept. Remember, by the time we get to 1914, Europe has exploded into tribalism and then has brought the entire world into its tribalism, and they call it World War I. I call it the first great European tribal war. So if Europe has no basis to talk to anybody about democracy. They couldn't even get it right. And then the major power in the Western Hemisphere, the United States, what has happened in their history? Well, let's look at it. independence in 1776. They fight the war. The war ends against England in 1803. Now, unlike the Haitians, the U.S. fought their war for independence because they didn't want to pay their taxes. that was the basis of their war for independence. They wanted representation in the British government. They didn't want to pay their taxes, so they fought against the British. The Haitians fought because they wanted to live. There's a complete difference in those two types of revolutions. So the U.S. gets its independence. A couple of years later, they have one of the most brutal civil wars. A couple of decades later, they have one of the most brutal civil wars imaginable. And at the same time, they have chattel slavery. And at the same time, they have a genocide against the indigenous population. So the U.S. is able to bolster its so-called democracy, even though women couldn't vote. And of course, besides the years 1865 to 1877, Africans couldn't vote. Indigenous people couldn't vote. So is it really even a democracy? But by the time we get to 1915, the U.S. has essentially kicked out all the other remaining European powers out of the Caribbean, for the most part. With the exception of the British, they've kicked primarily the Spanish out with the Spanish-American War in the 1890s. They've kicked them out. So America is flexing its muscle as they don't call themselves an imperial power because, they're a quote-unquote democracy, so they're not an empire, but we are part of a manifest destiny that we have to bring American-style democracy and, more importantly, open up these places to American businessmen in the Americas. So the U.S. is flexing, and the U.S. is looking at Haiti. And the U.S., as we talked about in the first half of this seminar, the U.S. has always had an eye on Haiti. In the immediate years following Haitian independence, the French that were running out of the island, many of them made their way to the U.S. The U.S. continued to watch Haiti because they were afraid that this symbol would upset slavery in the United States. And in fact, there was some truth to that. When Denmark Vesey had his rebellion against U.S. Slavery in South Carolina, his goal was to rob the banks, get on boats, and go to Haiti. So Haiti was seen as a symbol to African people. So the U.S. was watching it for that. By the time we get to the 1890s, the U.S. is trying to use, or the 1880s, the U.S. is trying to use people like Frederick Douglass as an ambassador to Haiti to try to get concessions for the Haitians to build, to allow the U.S. to build a naval base in Haiti. Frederick Douglass didn't go for it, the Haitians didn't go for it, but they tried. So Haiti had always been in the orbit of the U.S. So by the time we get to 1915, the U.S. is looking over the situation. They're looking at the Caribbean. They want total control of the region. So they look at Haiti, they said, Haiti has too many European businessmen, Germans and Italians and other folks doing business in Haiti. We want to control that business. So we're going to look at the political situation in Haiti. And between 1911 and 1915, there were a number of heads of state in Haiti. Died in office, overthrown, assassinated. Between 1911 and 1915, 6 heads of state in Haiti. The U.S. said, this is why we need to go into Haiti. Political instability. Without saying it, what they're saying is, just like in Africa, where you have all these tribes, as they would say, you got all these tribes, and they're practicing cannibalism, and there's instability. We need to bring European understandings of things to Africa to civilize these people. The U.S. is saying political instability, these people don't know how to govern themselves, they can't control their money, their economy, and foreign, i.e. American businesses that are operating in Haiti are suffering, and they're not able to make profits. So therefore, in order to save Haiti from itself, to save the Haitian people from political chaos because they can't run their own country, in order to make sure American businesses are able to thrive, we need to send in troops to Haiti. This should sound very familiar in 2024. The idea that African people, Haitian people, can't govern themselves and therefore need external military forces to come in to reestablish order. That was the rationale in 1915. It was the rationale in the 1990s. It was the rationale in 2004. And 20 years later, in 2024, that's the rationale that's being used today. So, 300 Marines land in Haiti in 1915. They come in, gunboat diplomacy. They essentially put their own president, a Haitian, in the office after President Sam is assassinated. President, and I'm gonna butcher his name, Dartiguave, I think that's how you pronounce it. He was the U.S.'s neo-colonial puppet in Haiti. They put him in office. What are the first things that they do? They rewrite the Haitian Constitution. One of the hallmarks of the Haitian Constitution, going all the way back to the first one, the first independence constitution in 1804, Dessalines made it a point to put into the Constitution, no foreigner can own land in Haiti. No foreigner, particularly white foreigner, can own land in Haiti. That's the first thing the U.S. Does. They rewrite the Constitution so that happens. The second thing that they do, they force the Haitian treasury to take their money out of Haiti and to put it in a bank in New York. And say, you don't know how to handle money, we will take your money, we will control your treasury, put it in a bank in New York. The third thing they do, they make it easier for American businesses to operate in Haiti without many restrictions. Fourth, they start a system of corvée labor, meaning they force people to work on railroads, to dig ditches, agricultural projects, all these things, forced labor on the Haitian masses. This did not go without challenge. As soon as the U.S. attempted to do these things, the Haitian masses rose up. Because one thing the Haitians said, yeah, we might be fighting each other. Yeah, we might have problems with who's the head of state. Yeah, there's colorism issues, but that's our business. You're not going to come in here and attack us. So although there were some elites that went along with the U.S., the masses, the working masses of Haiti said, we fought against the French. Our ancestors fought against the Spanish, fought against the British, and now we got to fight against you. So they took to the fields. One book that came out in 2021 that articulates this struggle for Haitian re-independence is a book, Haiti Fights Back, The Life and Legacy of Charlemagne Perrault. Charlemagne Perrault we're going to talk about in a second, but this is written by Eveline Alexis. I recommend this. You can get it digitally, and you can also get it, the hardcover. It came out in 2021, so it's a little bit cheaper than it was when it first came out. But this uses all of the historical record to recreate this time period. It uses U.S. records. It uses the letters that U.S. Soldiers wrote back about what was going on. It uses official diplomatic correspondence between the U.S. and the Haitian elites. And then it uses oral history and the letters of the Haitian revolutionaries at this time, led by Charlemagne Perrault. So when the Haitian masses rose up, it wasn't just the men. Just like in the revolution that ended slavery and led to Haitian independence, Haitian women were on the front lines, working as snipers, working as guerrillas in the field. When I say guerrilla in the Spanish word, the guerrillas are warriors in the field, working as spies. Because remember, just like in Africa, Haitian women still ran the markets. So they were able to see the movement of troops in the major cities. They were able to see, who was talking to who and get that information back to the revolutionaries. So the masses went back to the tradition of 1804, fighting against an invading army. Again, the martyr of this revolution in its early years, in the first 4 years, so he started fighting the U.S. in 1915, and he was assassinated by the U.S. in 1919. But just like so many of our leaders, assassination doesn't mean complete death. Because when you're assassinated, now you become a martyr, you become a symbol. In the U.S., and I'll tell a story about this, but Charlemagne Perrault was a mayor of one of the cities before U.S. occupation. He was a soldier. He was well loved by the people in his territory. And when the U.S. came in, he was one of the few leaders to refuse to bow down to the U.S. The elites had told everybody, look, you just have to go along with what's happening. You have to lay down arms. You have to allow the U.S. to reconstruct our army and our police, which is what the U.S. did. This is one of the major legacies of the U.S. occupation of Haiti. The U.S., and this is, again, I keep going to this point because it's important. We have to study Haiti because what was done in Haiti would be done throughout the rest of the 20th century into the 21st century. One of the first things you do is you make sure that the army and the police are loyal to you. And if you come in and you find out they're not, then you have to reorganize the army. You have to put your own generals that you have trained in their place, so they're not going to do the business of the Haitian people. Prior to U.S. occupation, the Haitian army was outward directed. It was designed to fight against invaders coming into Haiti. And of course there were the police, but they weren't as big of a force. The army was designed to face outward enemies. What the U.S. did in Haiti, what the U.S. did in Colombia, what the U.S. did in Venezuela, and so many other places, what the U.S. continues to do in Africa, what the European powers did in Africa, they turned the police and the military inward. They created a police and a military force designed to crush the rebellions of the masses, not to ever be able to stand toe-to-toe against an invading army. This is the case in Africa, this is the case in the Caribbean, this is the case in South America. Charlemagne Perrault wouldn't go along with the situation. So he, along with a number of growing insurgents, rural people, urbanites, got together and they formed groups of rebels that would fight the Marines. And of course, in U.S. diplomatic correspondence, in the press, among the elite Haitians, what do they call these people? They called them bandits. They called them rogues. They called them, what in today's language we call gangs. They said these people, they're not fighting for independence. They don't have any political motivation. They just want money. They just want to go in the countryside and destroy things, or go in the city and destroy things, and they have no political motivation. That's how they were presented. Again, we see lessons for today. When you read about Haiti, they talk about the gangs and the gang situation. There's never an analysis of, well, do these people have a political agenda? Are they fighting against corruption? Are they fighting against the influence of outsiders in Haitian politics and the economy? You just limit them to gangs. That way, folks outside of Haiti, when they say, we're going to send forces into Haiti to fight gangs, our mind thinking, okay, yeah, that's a good thing because gangs are bad. That's how important language is. So back then they did the same thing. They called them bandits. But Perrault was able to galvanize the countryside, the men and the women, and they fought. Eventually, the U.S. was able to capture him. They imprisoned Perrault. But he broke out because the guards were actually on his side. So the guards that were supposed to be in this police force that was reorganized by the U.S. were actually revolutionaries. So it also, there's some lessons to be shown in that. When we talk about the role, well, I'm giving away too many secrets. We'll talk about that in another class. But anyway, that happened. So he broke out of prison and continued to fight against the U.S. Now the sad part is, the reason why Charlemagne Perrault was martyred, somebody snitched, somebody turned, just as the guards of his prison decided to become revolutionaries. You had people in his circle that decided to become reactionaries and felt that it was in their best interest to join the U.S. invaders. So you had a U.S. Army officer who got in blackface, actually, who was guided by this turncoat in Perrault's troops. And they led him right to Perrault, and he killed him. Now, the U.S. took his body, and this is what they would do with a number of Haitian insurgents. It wasn't just a war that they would, imprison folks. They would mutilate bodies. This is 1915, 1919. So let's back up again. These Marines that came into Haiti, these are the same white folks that are in the U.S. lynching people. 1919 was the red summer in the U.S. This was a summer where one of the worst summers of anti-African violence all across the country, the Midwest and especially the South, where African people would be strung up by the neck, African men mutilated, having their private parts cut off, their bodies chopped up and sold in stores, whole white towns coming out to take pictures under the mutilated bodies of black folks swinging from bridges, swinging from trees, and they would sell the pictures of these things as postcards. This is what's happening in the U.S. So the folks that are coming into Haiti have this mentality. So when they capture Charlemagne Perrault, they take his body and they nail it to 2 doors. And then they take pictures of it. And then they take these pictures and they plaster them all over Haiti to say, here's your leader, here's what we did to him. But it had the opposite effect among the Haitian people. This image had the same effect that the image of Christ on the cross has for many Christians around the world. It galvanized the people. It said, oh yeah, you killed our martyr. This is going to become the symbol of our revolution. Because although you killed his physical body, the spirit of Perrault remains in us, and we will continue to fight against you. And they did. They continued to fight against not only now the U.S. military, but a whole bunch of Haitian turncoats that have joined the military and police force that's under the control of American officers, that continued to wreak havoc on the Haitian people even after the U.S. occupation. We'll talk about that because, again, that was the strategy. The U.S. came in with only 300 Marines, but they were able to use the elite that never regarded the wishes of the masses, as well as a new crop of folks that were trained in their military system to do their bidding. But the spirit of resistance lived on. The U.S. occupation would, quote unquote, end in 1934. And one of the reasons why it would end was because there was so much diplomatic pressure. Along with the resistance of the Haitian people, there was also diplomatic pressure. African Americans in the U.S. who had had a connection to Haiti, who had been studying Haiti since they were children. Because in the segregated schools in the South and in the North in the United States, Toussaint L'Ouverture was more well known probably than George Washington. African Americans in the early 20th century, they would put on plays where children would dress up and reenact the Haitian Revolution. It was on their minds. So when Haiti got invaded, just like when Ethiopia got invaded, African Americans diplomatically marched on Washington. Well, not marched, but they figuratively marched to Hawaii. They wrote letters and they lobbied. People like James Weldon Johnson, who was a leader in the NAACP. He's more famous for writing the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. He was an advocate for Haiti. Marcus Garvey was active, and his UNIA was growing in Harlem. The Jamaican Marcus Garvey was advocating for Haiti. W.E.B. Du Bois, others. And they were able to connect with Haitian intellectuals like John Price Mars, who was an amazing scholar coming out of Haiti, who influenced all of these people. And that would create the new Negro movement of the 20s and 30s. But he's writing during the time of the occupation. So Africans around the world are looking to fight against the U.S. occupation. So eventually ends, quote unquote, ends in 1934, but not before incredibly disastrous changes are made to Haiti. Again, the Constitution has been changed. This new military police force that's been trained and overseen by the U.S. And in addition, economically, the U.S. made Haiti pay for its own occupation. They took a page out of the French book with the indemnity. The money that was taken from Haiti and put into the bank in New York was used to pay American bureaucrats. So only 300 Marines came into Haiti, but thousands of American bureaucrats came to oversee the occupation of Haiti, to establish schools. And when they came, again, they brought that racism into Haiti. They wanted separate facilities, even from the quote-unquote mulatto class. They wanted separate facilities. They wanted the American-style Jim Crow to be in the major cities of Haiti. Because they say, if I got to go work down there, I want it to be like, Alabama. I want it to be like Washington, D.C. I want it to be like these places, Philadelphia. So you had thousands of American bureaucrats come in. And in this atmosphere, folks like John Price Mars analyzed the situation, and they said, since independence, our country have been led by people who are spiritually and intellectually still slaves. They are still tied to France. And we will never get free as a nation as long as our leaders and our intellectual elite and these other folks still are guided by French philosophy or European philosophy or European ideas, people that think the white man's ice is somehow colder, this type of mentality. So John Price Mars and others, but led by John Price Mars, wrote about indigenism. The idea that we need to go back and look at what the folks in the rural areas are doing, because they truly represent real Haiti. Not the folks that are living big in the cities, that are sending their kids to France and England for school, but what are the rural people doing? What do they believe in? What guides them? How have they been able to retain African traditions and African religions and African ways of organizing socially? And how can we take that, which we never had the opportunity to really do? Our leaders never valued that post 1804. How do we take that to build our nation back, to get out of occupation and to build a better future? So he writes a book called So Spoke the Uncle. And it called for the elites to serve the masses. It talked about recognizing voodoo as a religion of the masses, as not something to be feared, it's not something to be shunned, but something to actually show our Haitianness. He founds the Institute of Ethnology, and he becomes the Africology chair in 1941, so some 7 years after. So he's using his position to create institutions to spread this idea. Now, his indigenism will be transformed by some into a new concept called Noirism, which is a little bit different than what John Price Mars initially set out. It has some similarities, but it's different. So indigenism, again, it's the idea that we should go back to our African culture, our Haitian culture, and let that lead us in our practice of how we deal with each other and how we deal with the rest of the world. Noirism said the issue in Haiti is the mulatto class. Ever since independence, this small elite has never allowed the black, dark-skinned masses to take over Haiti. And until this is solved, we will always be behind. So it's a little bit of it's more based on race and skin color arguments. And there's some validity to what they were saying, because it was an elite that was primarily represented by the light-skinned class that had dominated Haitian politics and economics. And it was largely that class that collaborated with, at the original outset of the occupation with the U.S. So there was some validity to what they were saying, but as we'll get into a little bit later, it was very superficial. It was the belief that if you just put black faces, dark-skinned faces in these places, things will get better. Indigenism was a little bit more complex, and that's not what John Price Mars says. But he writes this book, and not only does it make a big splash in Haiti, his book, So Spoke the Uncle, made a big splash throughout the entire African world. In French-speaking Africa, people like Leopold Senghor from Senegal read this book when they were in France. People like Ami Sazer, who was in France, people like Leon Demas, the French-speaking Africans that would start the Negritude movement, they read So Spoke the Uncle. And Senghor, who's considered the father of Negritude, said, "And I read Thus Spoke the Uncle in one gulp, like the water in a cistern in the evening after a long stage in the desert. I was overwhelmed. Uncle legitimized the reasons for my quest, confirmed what I had sensed, because telling me about the treasures of negritude that he had discovered on and in Haitian soil, he taught me to discover the same values, but pristine and stronger on and in the land of Africa." Because again, studying Haiti is like a preview to what's going to happen in the rest of the African world. What John Price Mars said was, our leaders, although France has left, been out of the scene for over 100 years, our leaders still think French. And what was going on in Africa at the same time, the French were in Senegal, the French were in Cote d'Ivoire, they were in Mali, they were in, they never left Martinique, and they were training Africans so that when French colonialism ever ended, the leadership would still think French. They would cling to French philosophy. They would shun their African art and culture and ideas and spirituality. So Senghor is among these group of African students that are saying, we can't let this happen. We have to go back into our African culture. We can't let colonialism divorce us from Africa. So he's inspired by Haitian. And he would then go on to inspire French-speaking Africans and English-speaking Africans and this new Negro movement, sometimes called the Harlem Renaissance, where you got Africans from North America, that are living in Europe, that are coming from Africa, the Caribbean, who are all engaging in this literary exercise, political exercise, social exercise of reclaiming African motifs and African ways of doing things. So Haiti played a big role in this new Negro movement. People like W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson and the Nardole sisters and other folks, and C.L.R. James, we talked about, who wrote the Black Jacobins, which we studied in the first couple of weeks. You have African Americans like Zora Neale Hurston, who went to Haiti and studied. She went to Haiti in 1935, 35 or 36, and she studied voodoo, and she studied Haitian rural culture, and she wrote about Tell My Horse, which is her book on, she was a great anthropologist that she wrote on Haitian culture. She's more famous for her novel, Their Eyes Are Watching God, but Zora Neale Hurston was one of these folks that was inspired by the working masses, the rural masses of Haiti. Before we take a break, let me just talk about another tragic element of the U.S. occupation. Because the U.S. not only occupied Haiti, at the same time, the U.S. also occupied the Dominican Republic, the eastern side of Hispaniola. And they did the same thing that they did in Haiti. When they came into the Dominican Republic, they created a police and military force that would not serve the Dominican people, that would not be created to stop external invasion, but to control the population in the interest of U.S. business. Among the group of people that joined this U.S. Created police and military force was a man by the name of Rafael Trujillo. Rafael Trujillo would go through the ranks of the military and ultimately become the leader of the Dominican Republic. He is the figurehead and the architect and the grand butcher, I would call him, of one of the genocides that few people even hear about. And genocide is really big in the news right now because South Africa has taken Israel to the International Court of Justice on genocide charges. This is a genocide of the 20th century that few people even know happened or what went down. So let's back up a little bit, because we talked about in our first 3 weeks how in the 19th century the Haitians were able to control the Dominican Republic, to take over the Dominican Republic. The first instance, Toussaint and Dessalines went over to that side to finish up ending slavery there. And then later on in the presidency of Boyer, the Haitians invaded the Democratic Republic and united the island. Now in 1844, the Dominicans would be able to break free again from the Haitians. And that was really instituted by the elite in the Dominican Republic. The masses in the DR were fine with having Haitians being united as one country. It was the elites in the DR that had a problem with it and were able to break free and take advantage of the chaos that was happening in Haiti and reestablish their own independence. So since that time, the elite in the DR had an anti-Haitian orientation. But the masses in the DR, particularly the ones on the frontier, this border between Haiti and the DR, they didn't have a problem with Haitians primarily. Now, there were some, of course, stereotypes among both sides, but primarily they worked together. People would go from one side to the other. The Haitian side was actually much more developed than the DR side. The DR side was relatively poor. There was a larger population in Haiti, and the DR was always there were always labor shortages in the DR. So there was a lot of land that was uncultivated that needed workers. So Haitians would go from the Haitian side of the border to DR side and work. They would come back at the end of the day. People would go to church on the Haitian side and come back. So it was a very fluid border. Nobody really had any issues. Trujillo comes into power in 1937. Oh, actually, he comes into power a little bit earlier than that. And he's given the task, really by the U.S., to say, we need this entire country under control. So that frontier area where, the Haitians are coming back and forth and all this stuff is going on, you need to control that. You need to control the country with a tight fist. And one of the ways that he decided to do that is, I am going to use, and there were also a number of Dominican elite and intellectuals, again, with their age-old anti-Haitian orientations, who said, we're going to create a narrative, and we're going to put it in the schools, and we're going to rewrite the history, and we're going to make it so that the people in the Dominican cultivate a dislike, a distrust, and an all-out hatred for everything Haitian and, in a way, everything African and even to some extent black. We're going to create a new national identity where the Dominicans are the descendants of the Tainos, completely. So if someone asks you what you are, I'm Taino. I'm Taino in Spanish. You could be black as the ace of spades, and we know from the historical record, unfortunately, that, not saying that people don't have elements of Taino in their ancestry. Of course they do. It was a mixing. But there hasn't been a full-blooded Taino in the Dominican Republic since Columbus's days. We know that, and you know, in the centuries afterwards. So this new identity was created among the Dominicans with this strong anti-Haitian sentiment. So the intellectuals came together. They rewrote the books, rewrote the history, created all this. But the worst example of this was 1937. So Trujillo, and even if you look at a picture of Trujillo, this is not what he really looks like. And there's actually pretty strong evidence that he has Haitian background himself. This is the mentality. This is how people get all messed up. You can kind of even tell from this painting, that's like tons of makeup, you know, that he's wearing to lighten himself. Because we're dealing with this whole colorism issue. We see it in the Caribbean, we see it in South America. So what Trujillo did, he needed a scapegoat. So one of the elements of anti-Haitianism in the DR is any problems, economic problems, social problems, blame it on the Haitians. Anything that goes wrong in the DR, we blame on the Haitians. So what he did, and he writes this is Trujillo's own words in October 1937. He said, "For some months, I have traveled and traversed the frontier in every sense of the word. I have seen, investigated, and inquired about the needs of the population. To the Dominicans who were complaining of the deprivations by Haitians living among them, thefts of cattle, provisions, fruit, etc., and were thus prevented from enjoying in peace the products of their labor, I have responded, I will fix this. And we have already begun to remedy the situation. 300 Haitians are now dead in Banica. This remedy will continue." And continue it did. The U.S. ambassador to Santo Domingo cabled President Roosevelt at the time, and he said, apparently with the approval of President Trujillo, a systematic campaign of extermination was directed against all Haitian residents. The drive was conducted with ruthless efficiency by the National Police and Army. Now, and this is from an article called Bearing Witness to Genocide, the 1937 Haitian Massacre. I'll put this on the website so you can read more about it. But this is the U.S. ambassador to the DR writing to the president. And he's not writing this with sadness, like we should do something to stop this. He's just writing it as a report, like this is what's going on, this is what the president has done, and this is what's happening. So the U.S. ambassador is saying this is, and who did it was the National Police and the Army. Because what Trujillo tried to do, and this is where it gets incredibly brutal, this wasn't a genocide where folks were just, you know, shot, which would be horrible. People were hacked to death with machetes, clubbed to death. Bodies were strewn up. Folks that attempted, when they saw the killings begin, and again, we're talking about the frontier. Let me give you a map. So where you see that red line, particularly in the north, where you see that red line, folks were trying to get back into Haiti when the killing started, and they closed the borders. So it wasn't just about letting people go back into Haiti and pushing it back in Haiti. They wanted to massacre people. There's a river called Massacre River, where people were trying to cross over the river to get back on the Haitian side, and they were shot down. They were hacked to death with machetes, very similar to what happened in Rwanda in 1994. They would test people, because many of these folks were actually born in the Dominican. Because again, this was a porous border. People would come, they would have families. You had Dominican women with Haitian husbands. You had Haitian women with Dominican husbands. It wasn't a thing among the actual people on the frontier. There was no hatred. But what Trujillo did, he made sure he deliberately had the army use machetes and clubs to make it seem like it was the people in the DR that did this and not the military that was under his control, so that he could blame it on, this is the people reacting to what the Haitians were doing. They're just defending themselves. No, it was the army under your direction that perpetrated the genocide. They said a small number of Haitian died, the Dominican side. It's somewhere between 15 and 25,000. We'll never know the exact number because people weren't even allowed to bury their dead. They burnt bodies. There were mass graves. Horrendous. And you've probably never, if you've never studied Haitian history or the Dominican Haitian situation, you've probably never heard of this genocide, this attempted genocide. And on the Haitian side of this, the leadership in Haiti, again, who were under the control of the U.S. at the time, had a very muted response to this. There was no strong response by the Haitian leadership because just like Trujillo, they themselves were backed by the United States. One of the worst massacres you could ever account for. But that didn't stop the resolve of the Haitian people. The Haitian people continued to resist and they continued to build. Let's stop for a second. I'll open up the Q&A. I know it went a little bit longer, but there's a lot of information I had to get through. I'll open it up for questions or comments now, and then I'll get back with the second part of this. So any questions? Mr. Thomas, go ahead. And is he speaking? Mr. Thomas, I'm not sure if you're on mute. Is he on mute? We're having some trouble hearing. There it is, yes.
Good afternoon, all. Happy New Year. The more I listen to the resistance movement and what we have gone through in terms of resistance, we're not docile. We come up with ideas like Ubuntu and Kwanzaa, leaders like the Malcolm X and MLK, which soon we'll be celebrating. And yet, we operate as if to say we're docile and ignorant. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we love to teach these classes, because there has never been a point in the history of African people where we were completely docile, like you mentioned, and acquiesced to exploitation. There's always been resistance. Now, it's been on different levels at different times, but it's always present. It's continued to be present in 2024. So yes, thank you for that. It's something we never forget. And I'm glad that you mentioned MLK, because Monday is the celebration of his birthday in the States, and I'll speak more about that on the end. But yeah, we have to do that day right as well. And we can't let people think that Dr. King was a street sweeper. That's what happens in the States. People go around, they collect trash, and they say, we're doing this for Dr. King, and they clean up their communities. Dr. King would rather you engage in the nonviolent protest on his birthday.
What I'm also saying is that we put emphasis and gathering like Ubuntu, but we don't live it. We just use it as a phrase or a catchphrase. We don't practice it. But it's there.
That's right. That's right. All of this is meaningless unless we actually live up to and do the things that we're learning about. You're right. Definitely. Ms. Peter, go ahead.
I'm struggling to understand how 300 Marines could come in and then they would send the treasury of Haiti to another country. I don't understand that. How could that happen?
Because they're coming into a situation with an already fractured elite. So the elite have been fighting amongst themselves, and the military was relatively weak. So you're coming into that situation, and when these 300 Marines come in, they come in strategically. So they don't come in fighting the people in the rural areas. They make their way straight to Port-au-Prince. They make their way to the seat of government, and they essentially force the government into these concessions. And not even, some of them weren't even forced. Some of the elites welcomed the U.S. They welcomed the occupation. So they were collaborators with the occupation as well. So when you have that mix of things, that's how that small force was able to do that. We can't totally excuse the Haitian elite for their complicity with the occupation. And once the masses realize what was happening, then you see the rebellion increase. And at the same time, the U.S. is bolstering those 300 with their newly created gendarmerie, the police and military force that they recruited people to join and paid them to join. So yeah, that's how they were extremely strategic in how they came in, who the government officials that they were able to coerce and to change these things. Yeah, it is when you see just the number, it is kind of shocking. But yeah, they were strategic in how they did that. Lisa, go ahead.
Just a quick question regarding the size of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So when you look at a physical map, the Dominican Republic looks larger, but when you speak to Haitians, they argue that Haiti is the larger country. What's the actual truth?
That's interesting. I haven't really thought about it in those ways. I could ask my brother PJ. Yeah, I'll look more into that and have a better answer for you next week. I can definitely say the Haitian side is much more mountainous, so that might make a slight difference in terms of land that's in it. But map projection is its own political battle, because there are a lot of things on maps that if you actually look at the reality, they're very different. For instance, Africa is not really portrayed on maps the size that it actually is. It's huge, but there's politics behind map projection. So I'll look that up and have a better answer for you next week.
Sounds great, thank you.
I'm just going to step to look into the chat. My teaching assistant isn't here. Do we know why they decided to have it in London? Very good question. So the question I'm answering is going back to the Pan-African Conference. The reason why they had it in London was twofold. One, they didn't have it in the African and the Caribbean because those places were under colonization for the most part. So unless they would have it in Ethiopia, but it would have been a hard time to get the people that went to make it to Ethiopia. A lot of these intellectuals were already in Europe at the time. What we'll see with these Pan-African conferences that turn into Pan-African congresses in the early 20th century, they morph into being more African as they go on. When they start, the majority of the participants are from North America are Africans from North America, Europe, and the Caribbean, and a few representatives from Africa, places like Ghana, Sierra Leone. I think there was a representative from Gambia. But there's primarily English speakers, with the exception of Benito Silva and a couple of folks from Haiti. And they were already in London or en route to London for some time. And I think there was also there might have been a World's Fair happening in London at that time as well. So there was a reason why a lot of these folks were in London or could easily get to London more so than getting to Africa at the time. It's 1900, so there's no planes at this point. So everything is steamship traveling. So folks, it was easier for people to get to London. It was a metropole, it was a leading city in the world. There were some intellectuals already there. It would be like if they had a meeting today, they would might have it in New York or a place like that where a lot of folks can get to. So that is the reason why. They're not going to have one in Africa until Africa is free. I think the first Pan-African Congress that happened in Africa was in Tanzania. I think it was the sixth or the seventh. I think it was the sixth in Dar es Salaam in I think in the 70s. But it's not until then that they actually have it in Africa. What were the reasons Haiti had 6 different leaders? Battles among the elites. Two died in office and they were overthrown because the elites were fighting over the economy, fighting over the politics of Haiti, and none of them were actually serving the masses. So as they were engaging in these battles, and there was a lot of corruption among that class, this is why you had those turnovers like that in those 4 years. Let's see, what do we have here? Today we want to send Kenya. Exactly. It was just a comment about the forces that are coming into Haiti. All right, so let's get back into it. What we'll end up with is how did the Haitian masses respond? So while all this is going on, the occupation, one of the demographic shifts that we're seeing in Haiti, we are seeing a migration of folks from the rural areas into the major cities, Port-au-Prince, Jacmel, some of these other places. So you're seeing a newly emerging urban working class that's arising in the major cities, along with, of course, the rural workers in Haiti. So in this milieu, after the U.S. occupation, a number of movements begin to grow, starting in the cities, but then eventually spreading out to the rural areas. One is the women's movement, the women's movement, led by people like Madeleine Sylvain Bouchereau. Madeleine Sylvain and her sisters were phenomenal. Her father was a diplomat and a scholar, and her sisters were amazing, and even her brother was amazing. This is a very talented family, part of the Haitian elite, but didn't have this elite mindset. They actually wanted to serve Haitian people. Her sister, I think, was the first Haitian woman anthropologist. One of her sisters was one of Haiti's first trained female doctors. Her brother was a scholar, and Madeleine Sylvain herself was actually Haiti's first female attorney, registered attorney, and she was also a scholar. Can we get this, Brother PJ? Yeah. So this is Madeleine Sylvain, and she traveled to the U.S. She gets her PhD from Bryn Mawr College, and she studies the women's movement in Haiti, of which she was a part of. So by the time we get to 1937, 38, where she begins the League of Feminine Action, Social Action, League of Feminine Social Action. This women's organization, and you can tell by the picture who's involved in this organization. This is a city organization, relatively light-skinned women that are kind of involved, but they have a mindset of using their social position, using their education to serve the masses of people in Haiti, particularly women. They wanted to change the laws for women in Haiti. Because again, going back to this obsession with the French, many of the laws in Haiti, going back to the 19th century, were based off of French law, were based off the Napoleonic Code. And part of that law was the secondary status of women. So unlike the situation in many African nations, where you had queen mothers and you had women with political and economic power, instead of following those models that were brought from Africa with the Haitian revolutionaries in 1804, the elite modeled their society off the French. So in the 1930s, women were in a secondary status. They couldn't vote. They were essentially the property either of their husbands or their fathers if they weren't married. Not legally property, but you couldn't do things. You couldn't own property. You couldn't go certain places without the permission of your father or your husband. I mean, it was really, women were treated like children in a way. The women in the rural areas, of course, had much more autonomy, had much more say over what they were going to do with their labor. They controlled markets. But primarily these city-dwelling women wanted greater rights. They were connected with an emerging women's movement around the world. And they are arguing that if Haiti is to be really independent and strong and developed, we need to have women's rights and women's rights organizations. So this organization was founded to educate women, to fight against illiteracy, to make sure that young girls went to school. It was founded to make sure women were treated right, that in state-sponsored hospitals and things like that women were free from domestic violence. They were very much ahead of their time. And Bouchereau and these others, they wrote about the women's rights issues. They connected with international organizers for women's movements. She was one of the early participants in what would become the UN's Committee on the Rights of Women. So she was very active in this role. And the Haitian women themselves were fighting. And by the time we get to 1950, it's not until 1950 that Haitian women get the right to vote. But they had been organizing all of this time in the post-U.S. occupation period, formal occupation, to get these rights. And they were able to fight strong for those. But the biggest change in Haiti was brought about by the student movement. The student movement. So again, you're having a world in the late 1930s that is dealing with a depression, and then World War II hits. And after World War II is over, the entire world is almost ready for a reset. The Africans on the continent are about to have their anti-colonial independence movements really begin in full force after World War II. It's a youth movement around the world who have seen the most devastating war in human history just occur. There's no different. Haiti is not on the sidelines of this. So high school students, university students are looking at this situation, and this is 1946. So many of these students were born in the height of US occupation. They were born in the 20s. They don't know a Haiti free of US control and occupation. And even after the occupation, quote unquote, ends in 1934, all of the structures that the US had put in place are still continuing. You still have the military and police force that is, now technically assisted by US officers. You still have US business interests. And now you have this influx of people that are in the city that are seeing this firsthand. They're seeing the corruption of the elite that have aligned themselves with the US, and they're not happy about it. So the students are reading and they're organizing. They're reading Marx. They're reading C.L.R. James. They're reading the radical socialist doctrines of the time. And they're talking about social revolution and socialism and communism. So that's one group of students. The other group of students, going back to John Price Mars, are studying indigenism and Noirism. Particularly the darker skinned students and the students that are coming from the rural areas, they're like, all of our problems are because of the mulatto elite. And we got to get rid of them and put black people in charge of the, dark black people in charge of the country in order for us to right these wrongs. So we got these two groups of students. They're aligned on the fact that they want change, but they want different types of change. And even so the students that are the radical Marxists, that are looking at things from a class analysis, they're saying that yes, there's a colorism problem, but the primary contradiction in our society is one of class, where the upper class elites are trying to hold down all working class people, whether they're light skinned or dark skinned. And the other group is saying, no, it's the light skinned people, we need to go ahead and get them out. So you got these two groups that both want change, but want it for different reasons. The radicals, they form a newspaper called La Roche, which means the hive. I had to look it up, because y'all know I don't speak French. But it's the hive, like the beehive. And this is called the organ of the new generation, of the young generation. And they're writing about how the US still controls Haiti through puppet politicians. They're writing about how the police and the military forces are abusive. They're the ones writing about what happened with the massacre on the border. So they're writing about all these things. They're taking their newspaper, which is written in French, and they're translating it to the workers in Port-au-Prince and some of the bigger cities in Creole. Because they realize our message, we're kind of privileged students that get to study in the university, that are studying in these elite high schools, that are forming these student groups, but our revolution will never be successful unless we have the working masses with us. So we need to take what we're writing in French and everything that we're learning from the Garveyite movement and the radical movements in Africa and Europe, translate all that into Creole to let the people know, hey, we're about to overthrow this US-backed government and we're going to need you. So they're doing that. And they're under immense pressure from the government. The police are raiding their publication spots, they're destroying their press. There's a strong anti-press sentiment among the government. They don't want a free press. They don't want a press that's going to allow these ideas to get out. They want people to think it's business as normal. So both of these groups, just like we're doing in this class, both of these groups studied the Haitian Revolution. They drew on inspiration from 1804. They both wanted a revolution, but with different outcomes. If the radical Marxist students had their way, Haiti would have been a socialist country similar to Cuba. If the Noirs had their way, things would be dark African black people in the space of the mulatto class, and they would lead Haiti. And they would have elements of the indigenism that was talked about by John Price Mars, but their main focus was the skin color issue. They said this is the major contradiction. It was the but the Marxist students, they weren't as politically organized as the Marxist students. They weren't out talking to the working class. They would write these things, and among these students was a young, newly trained medical doctor named Francois Duvalier, who we will talk about soon. He was a Noirist. He was one of these folks that was advocating getting rid of the mulatto class and having dark-skinned people be in charge. The radicals were much more organized. They struck first. the students that published this newspaper, they formed their own student organization, and in January 1946, they called for a strike in Port-au-Prince. They left their classrooms and they were going to march. And here's the interesting place they were going to march to. They were going to march to the U.S. Embassy. Now you're thinking, if they're marching against the government, they're marching against the president at this time, was President L.A. Laycott, who was a light-skinned guy. Why wouldn't you march to the presidential palace? Because they knew the real power is not the puppet, it's the puppet master. So you go to the U.S. Embassy. So they're making their way to the U.S. Embassy, and immediately the U.S. trained, U.S. interest police and military force attack the students, beat them up, bloody them. They come back the next day, and they're marching again, but this time they go and they go to the women's school, the young women's secondary school for women. And they say, if you come march with us, maybe the police won't beat you up because you're women. So very courageously, these young sisters form a protective wall around the primarily brother student activists, and they march to the embassy. And then they're joined by the workers who are also dissatisfied. Many of them that are working for American firms. And again, that American racism has been there since the occupation. So the owners of these firms and these people, they don't let Africans, Haitians get to a certain degree. You know, there's abuses and all that. So they're marching. The workers join the march. Bus drivers join the march. Shop owners shutter their doors. It is a full-out insurrection. And then they start fighting the police, because now it's like, you're not going to beat us because everybody's in on it now. There's clashes. It's an unstable situation. And the president is forced. So this happens in January. By the time we get to May, or actually he's removed from power at the end of January, because the women's organizations join, the workers join, and they all force the president to resign. He actually ends up in Miami. This is a trend that we're going to see with these Haitian leaders ending up in the United States for exile. But it's not until, and these are some of the, if you want to read about this, a good book, Red and Black in Haiti, Radicalism, Conflict, and Political Change, written by Matthew Smith. He's a scholar from the Caribbean. He's written this book about 1934 to 1957 about these two groups. Now, what happens is, and these are some of the students that led this protest that were able to force the president from office. What happens in March, he's removed from power, and primarily it's the military. The military steps in. Because the president sees the situation, he realizes what's going on, his cabinet resigns, and he says, okay, what's going to happen? The military says, okay, you need to go. He tries to dissolve the Senate and do some things. And they're like, you need to go. We're going to have new elections. They couldn't just do, the situation was so chaotic because of what the students and the workers had done that they basically shut down the economy and the politics of Haiti, that the U.S. had to take a step back. They couldn't put a new puppet in. So elections were held, and the Noiristes, who were unorganized up until this point, are able to craft a political message that speaks to the majority of Haitian people. The young radicals, they had their message, but their message wasn't as easily digestible as the message of the Noiristes, students, and now these intellectuals that have this Noirist orientation. They're able to tell the masses of people, all this suffering, the backwardness of the country, anything that's perceived as backwardness, this is all a result of the corruption of the mulatto elite. They're the reason for this. We cannot let these people control government. It was a very basic and simple understanding. But as we see with American politics today and a lot of politics, if you sell people a simple idea and you give them an enemy, the same way Trujillo did with the Haitians in the DR, if you give people an enemy, it's easy for them to digest and they will run with that. So the young radicals weren't able to have time enough to articulate their class analysis. Like, no, like it's the mulatto class, but it's really a class issue. So they didn't get the votes. It was the Noiristes that got the votes, and they were able to put into the presidency, Dumarsais Estamine. Now, Estamine, he did a pretty good job. He rewrote the Constitution to limit the power of foreign businesses. He did a lot to bring more black folks into politics. He was an educator, so he did a lot for the education of the country. And for a time, he was really against, the U.S. influence. The problem was he inherited a military that had been trained and organized by the U.S. So by the time we get to 1956, he's overthrown by the military. Goes into exile, actually ultimately dies in New York. The military take over for some time. But the masses again rise up and they force new elections. So by the time, and while all this is going on, now the Noirist political ideology is the primary political ideology in Haiti. The radicals are pretty much sidelined. The Marxist radicals that were talking about class. And this is really interesting. Again, we study Haiti to see trends that you're going to see among the African world later on. Because the Noirist, it has this message that sounds good on paper. Yeah, if you give black folks the opportunity to run the country, they'll run it better than mulattoes, but there's no class analysis. So what they really want, they don't want to change the social dynamics of exploitation of workers. They just want black people to be the ones doing the exploiting. This is something that we'll see again in Congo with Mobutu. Mobutu was one of the people responsible for the death of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. When Mobutu comes into power, he wants to make things authentically African. He changes the name from Congo to Zaire, which he says is more African. He changes his own name to Mobutu Sese Seko, whatever he called himself. He started wearing animal print stuff with like leopard hats and all this, while at the same time robbing the Congo of billions of dollars and being in bed with folks like the Ronald Reagans of the world and the other Western imperialists. So they used the veneer of African authenticity to still continue the exploitation of people. It's just black faces doing it. Francois Duvalier was one of the leading Noirist voices. He wrote a book called The Problem of the Workers in Haitian History. And he writes of classes, and he thinks it's a class analysis, but it's a Noirist text. He writes with another scholar, Dennis, and he writes this book, and again, he uses Haitian history to place all the blame on the mulatto elite. No real class analysis, even though it says class, no real class analysis. That way, when Duvalier ultimately does come to power, the people are happy when he first comes to power. Here's this doctor, that's why he's called Papa Doc, because he was actually a doctor, he's a medical doctor. He had served the peasant masses in Haiti. And he had this noir, so thinking, all right, here's this strong black man with this black consciousness. He's going to represent the interests of the working people. He's going to fight against the U.S. But he ultimately becomes a puppet of the U.S. He becomes one of the worst leaders in Haitian history. And we'll talk about that next week. But it all starts with this. And again, it's for us to learn these lessons. This is the same type of thing that happened in Ethiopia, where you had radical students with different ideas, some with a class analysis. In the case of Ethiopia, it was a national analysis. Instead of saying, in Haiti it was the mulatto class is running everything, we need to get rid of them, their question was, how do we get rid of Amara domination in Ethiopia? And what ends up happening when you have these radical students that both want change and they can't come to an agreement, what usually fills the void and takes over power is the military. And oftentimes, for the most part, 90% of the time, that military is not in the interest of the masses of people. Now, you have your rare cases of your Thomas Sankaras, your Muammar Gaddafi's, but those are very rare. Most of the time, they're either in their own interest they want to control the economy of the state and get rich, or they're in the interest of who trained them. And who trained them, oftentimes, in the New World, in the post-1945 Cold War era world, it's the United States. It's the United States that trains these officers. So no matter what goes on politically, they know they can pull a switch, get an officer to take over, and run it in their interest. And if they don't get an officer, then they can corrupt or help facilitate the corruption or encourage the corruption of someone like a Duvalier. Because he wasn't always corrupt. And there's a lot of, we'll get into next week what happened to Duvalier. There's a lot of stories about that he might have had a stroke and then that messed up. There's a lot of stuff. It is some stuff about spirituality where We'll get into it next week, but we'll stop there this week. Next week, we're going to talk about the Haitian people's resistance to neo-colonialism in the present, in the form of the Duvaliers, both Papa Doc and Baby Doc, and how the Haitian people continued their revolution. So 1946, there was so much promise with 1946, when they got rid of Lecoq, and the people were saying, yes, we're finally going to have a Haiti that represents the interest of Haitian people. But because of those seeds that the U.S. had planted during the occupation, that wasn't to be so. So the revolution has to pick up again, and this time against the Duvaliers. That's what we'll talk about next week, going up to 2010, and then the week after we'll conclude with what's going on with the Haitian Revolution today, because it's an ongoing process that we all have to be aware of. So we'll stop there today. I'll open it up for questions and comments.